shows that we're live.
Do you see it? Oh, no, you're not.
No, I can't see on mine.
Yep.
All right. So we are live, everybody. This is the Doug and Fur Show. My name is Doug Petrozelli. This is my partner in truth,
Fernando.
And today we're going to talk about climate change, solutions, ideas, what we think about it. We don't necessarily agree on everything, me and Fernando, but I think we have some pretty good common ground. We're going to bring our perspectives here.
I blindly agree with everything you say.
All right. Thank you so much. This is just an ego stroking. But let's start with the fundamentals. What do we believe? What is your thoughts on do we believe the planet is warming?
Well, I essentially think, right, that with this issue, there's a big misconception from the liberal side, from the left side, or I won't even call it that, from the environmentalists.
Uh-huh.
There's a big misconception of Republicans and conservatives. They think that we don't care about the planet,
right,
and that we believe climate change is a hoax, and
right.
and it's like, no, we're all fine, and
right.
in fact, I'm going to keep polluting, and I'm going to throw straws in dolphins' noses.
Right. Who cares about the future? I'm going to die before any of the big stuff happens, right?
Exactly.
Right.
And that's just not true.
I don't believe that, by the way. I'm painting a stereotype of which I believe is a perception.
We don't want anyone to crop that out and use it against us, right?
Yeah.
So we care about the environment just as much as an environmentalist does, and we do. I believe that the planet is warming, and I believe in science, and I believe in scientific facts.
Yeah.
And I think that most conservatives would agree with me, and most reasonable people would agree that science is science, you know. And I think that the disagreement lies, and this is, by the way, what I'm trying to do. What we're trying to do with every single issue is we're trying to find the common ground. We're debunking myths about what each side believes,
right?
And we're trying to find the common ground. So I think that most reasonable people would agree that, hey, we care about the planet.
Right.
This is our planet, and we care about it, and we want to do the best we can to conserve it. In fact, that's why the conservatives, right?
Right.
In the name. So we want to do our best we can to keep it intact and to preserve it and just push forward toward the future. So that's the first myth I wanted to get rid of there.
Right. Yeah, so I want to talk about, so I'm a firm believer, like, I want to know, let's look at the data, show me the data. Like, I truly believe people lie, numbers don't. That's something that I actually live by. I know that there is more to life than that, but coming from a standpoint, a secular standpoint, which I want to just clarify, secular is from a political, governmental standpoint. I think secularism is great for government and it's terrible for everything else. So we do have to realize that we live in a world that needs politics, that needs government. So we do need to embrace a level of secularism, but that's not the deepest part of me. So I want to be clear. But in that being said, we do need to look at data. We do need to look at logic and reason, and pretty much solely from a political standpoint. And so that being said, I do believe the numbers don't lie. When we look at the history of the planet, we can see that it is warming.
Yeah.
I know that you were talking earlier off camera earlier, where we were talking about graphs, and you could see a spike of, what was it, CO2 emissions?
Yeah, for sure.
Because there are other CO2 emissions that happen when volcanoes erupt. There's CO2 emissions. They're not just from fossil fuels being burned by human beings. That's not the only thing that releases CO2. And we were looking at this graph, talking about this graph, that there's been a spike over the last 100 years. No coincidence that the last 100 years we've been burning fossil fuels at an enormous rate for our energy.
Mm-hmm.
And we're looking at, there's a lot of evidence that suggests, yes, the planet's also been warming over the last 100 years. I do want to lay some ground that there is an argument saying that we don't know for sure. We can't prove, let's put it this way, we can't prove that it is human beings burning fossil fuels that's causing this. We can't prove it.
Well, I would just say there's an overwhelming amount of evidence.
Yeah.
You can't prove a lot of things
Sure.
in science. You just use evidence. So we know that CO2 is a greenhouse gas, meaning it
Right.
traps heat. We know that we're emitting more, and we see that the planet is warming at a faster rate than it was before. I'm not a scientist, so I don't know exactly how they get the data, like how much CO2 there was in the atmosphere in 1665. I don't know how they get that data.
Right.
But if I trust the scientific method and I trust that these things are peer reviewed and things like that, then yeah, so you can see that correlation, and even though you can't 100% prove it, like there's just very strong overwhelming evidence,
Right.
and reason suggests that the planet is warming due to the emission of CO2 caused by fossil fuels.
Right. So regardless of either way, I think that we have this might be one area me and Ferd maybe slightly disagree, where I'm not 100% convinced that it's human beings that are causing this global warming, this climate change, I should say. He's a little bit more convinced, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Benefit of the doubt is right now the planet is warming, sea levels are rising. Is that due to us? And we're going to get into that a little bit later, because that goes into the Paris Climate Agreement, which we're going to probably touch on a little bit.
And
which
you know
we
what?
need to.
The way I see it is, regardless of whether humans are causing it or not,
Right.
the point is, can we do something to help and to stop that?
Right.
Right? And do we need to? How big of a deal is it? Like, what happens if we don't do anything to stop it? Things like that. Like, forget what's causing it, and let's just figure out how we can solve this issue.
Right. So we have to agree, like we said before, sea levels rising. That means that there's land that's being encroached upon, and the planet is warming. We have to agree on that. That's a reality. We can't deny that. And if we all can agree that that's true, then we got to move to the point where we're going to talk about right now. Is it human caused, or is this going to happen anyway? And if it's human caused, due to us burning fossil fuels, then we need to talk about, okay, then we need to burn less fossil fuels. If it's not human caused, then we have to really talk about mitigation. Those are the two extremes of the two sides. So mitigation would be such thing as building seawalls.
Yeah.
Because if it's going to rise, sea levels are going to rise anyway. Because the biggest problem is that sea level is going to rise, and land that human beings are on right now is going to be underwater.
I heard there's a country that is below sea level, and they built seawalls really high, and they're actually really safe. Do you remember the name of the country? Was it Denmark?
Well, Denmark, a lot of the Scandinavian countries have built seawalls over, I forget which, I think it's not Norway.
Finland?
No, it's the Netherlands. The Netherlands built,
okay.
They have, just a real quick side note, so Hurricane Katrina that hit New Orleans, it really was the fact that levee, a lot of people said, oh, this is the direct result of climate change and human beings messing with things. And there's some truth to that. But the reality is that levee was not maintained. The levee that was meant to hold that back was not being maintained. In Norway, they have very similar levees. They prepare them for 10,000-year storms. They have very high standards, and they've never had that same problem.
Yeah, okay.
The point is, if we're going to do that, the point is that we can do these things. These things are possible. What happened in New Orleans doesn't have to happen if we give these things the special attention that they need.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to go back to this whole idea that both conservatives and liberals environmentalists, we both love the planet. We both agree that the planet needs to be conserved. And I think the difference lies in the approach we take to that, right? Conservatives generally hold this strong idea that the power lies in the people and people's innovation and people's ability to just persevere and make things better.
Yes.
And liberals think of this idealistic idea where it's like, if you give the people in power more power, they're going to guide everyone to a better future.
Right.
So they come up with these, in their head, they're like, well, let's come up with these laws and these government practices where the government tells us we can't burn fossil fuels, and the government tells us what we can and cannot do, and that way they're going to save the planet. Right. And conservatives are saying, like, no, let's let local governments decide, and let's move in that direction.
Yeah, let's let the free market, because whenever there's a demand for something and you have a free market, the free market always produces that demand. And it produces it and becomes better.
So if you can save
market.
people money with something like nuclear power, right, so that's just in and of itself that's going to take care of it. And government intervention, you're giving more power to the government and signing away your freedoms. That's where the difference lies, right? So environmentalists or liberals are like, hey, let's give the power to the government, and conservatives are like, let's us keep the power but still do something about it. You know?
Right. And I think that we also have to look at history. When the government has had more power, we've had less freedom. And I've even heard the argument from some people that I want to say are actually starting to become a little bit more mainstream, but we'll just say for the sake of this podcast right now, they're a little bit more fringe, that they'd rather sacrifice freedoms for security. Um, no doubt that is something that people agree with. I fully disagree with. That's not an American idea. We have to look at what has produced better outcomes overall for individuals en masse was when the government had more control or less control. History tells us it's when the government has less control, the individuals have more control, that the world turns out better.
Yeah, exactly.
Everything turns out better under those circumstances, and we have to trust in the price of freedom.
Yeah, and states' rights and even local government rights.
Right.
Like if looking at the environment, right? So the fisherman and the farmer and those people that practice their own energy practices in Oklahoma are going to know more about their own local environment and how their own burning of fossil fuels and their own environmental deals impact their economy.
Right.
Or sorry, not their economy, their environment, as opposed to some person in the United Nations, some politician in the United Nations that knows nothing about their land. So you have to delegate that stuff to the lower levels and let them decide.
Right.
As long as they're not doing anything too crazy.
Right. So one argument that I want to kind of talk about is that we say this when it comes to climate change. I think there's an idea out there that says things are as bad as they've ever been, and they're only getting worse. And I want to ask you, what's your thought on that? Because I disagree. That's an idea that I completely reject.
Well, when you're saying as bad as they've ever been, what do you mean in the past 100,000 years or 1,000 years?
Well, I guess we can't say. Let's just say the last 100 years.
Yeah, in the last 100 years, when you say as bad as they've ever been, if you're talking about the planet's temperature, then yeah, it's the hottest it's ever been.
Effects toward human beings, because yes, the temperature rising doesn't necessarily
mean there's a lower quality of human life.
Right.
Yeah,
so
definitely
let's talk
not.
about the encroachment on human beings' quality of life.
Yeah, well, I mean, we have people live longer lives. They're more prosperous. They have more money. In the most recent years, as opposed to say 100 years ago.
Right.
But I understand that an environmentalist or someone who's like big, like, hey, we need to save the planet because in the next 5 years we're dead.
Right.
Their counter argument to that is going to be like, I mean, yeah, you're fine now until the planet burns up and we all die.
Right.
So I understand it's not 100% a valid argument. Like that's not what we're pushing for, I guess.
Right. Yeah. So one of the things is that, well, we have to also remember that since I think we'll get into this a little bit later, hopefully, but since the 70s they've been saying 12 years. In 12 years, everything's going to get to this point where there's a point of no return. And every 12 years, it restarts itself. And, in 2000, I believe Al Gore said that there would be no polar bears in 2012. All the polar bears were going to die by 2012. He said this in 2000. And as of, I think, last year, 2020 or 2019, there's more polar bears now than ever recorded.
Yeah, and I do want to give credit to the conservation movement, right? So if he comes on and he says there's going to be no polar bears and people start taking action, that's a good thing. But I do think that the fear mongering shouldn't be the cause of it, right? Like, what does Al Gore know about the environment? Leave that to the scientists to present the facts, and then you have conservation movements move forward. I think that I don't know that climate change is going to end the world in 12 years.
Right.
But I do know that we can do something to slow it down and even reverse the effects. So.
Right. Well, the other argument that, the idea that I just want to real touch base on, just because I want to be fair to all the arguments, is that, there's more damage now. There's more economic damage that happens now than ever before. There's more homes that are destroyed than there was 100 years ago, and so on and so on.
Oh, is it already now?
Yeah. We can actually look at economic statistics of like property damage values, even adjusted for inflation. And today there's more damage economically adjusted for inflation than there was 100 years ago. But let's take a look. I looked at a picture the other day of actually Miami Beach. South Beach, actually, and what it looked like 100 years ago and what it looks like today. And the one thing that I can see the correlation is that we are just way more wealthy than we are today. We have way more buildings. The point is, there's way more stuff to hit. There's way more things for the environment to damage. So I just want to talk about that argument for anybody listening or hearing this and having somebody that they're going to debate later and hearing this argument. Understand that if there's more stuff to hit, then if there's more economic centers that a hurricane can hit and destroy, then yes, there's going to be more damage. But overall quality of life has still sustained itself. We've built more things in the last 100 years too. So we have to remember that.
Yeah. So I did want to touch on solutions, right? So I want to touch on the solutions that Democrats or liberals are big proponents of, such as the Green New Deal.
Right.
And so let's talk about the Green New Deal, right?
Yeah, the Green New Deal. So I will tell you that I disagree with the Green New Deal. I have the guy's name here, one of the founding architects of the Green New Deal. I'm going to have a hard time
his name is
pronouncing
hard to pronounce.
his name. I'm not going to be able to pronounce that name. But anyway, if you want to pull it up, are they able to still see us?
Audio? I have not switched out yet. And it's still going on. I'm just pulling up the name.
So we're going to try to pull up his name. But the architect...
Saikat Chakrabarti. I'm sorry, Saikat, if I mispronounce your name.
Can we throw him up on the screen by any chance?
Yeah. Let me pull him up on the screen.
So this is the guy who is I guess they say the architect of the Green New Deal. He really helped write it, draft it, and this has been a thing that's been going on for a long time. But I'm talking about the current Green New Deal that I believe came out in 2018, 2019. Very much proposed by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, or AOC.
It's not showing up, but that's fine. We'll just go back.
Okay, so this guy, the one thing that really bothered me about him is that he said when they first started writing this Green New Deal, it wasn't so much of let's save the planet and save the environment. It was more of like let's revolutionize the economy. That is something that bothers me.
Yeah, he did. He said that wasn't even the idea. It wasn't about the environment. In fact, that
was the founding of the Green New Deal.
Yeah, the Green New Deal was based on the New Deal, which was in Roosevelt's time.
Yes.
And it had nothing to do with the environment. It was all about socioeconomic policies to get people out of the Great Depression. So it had to do with race inequality and economic inequality.
Yes.
And that sort of thing.
At the end of the day, it was confiscation of wealth and redistribution, which is communism.
So, so the Green New Deal was just an expansion of that, which just took the same things, and all it added was the environment in front of it.
Right. It basically took the New Deal, which was wealth confiscation, redistribution, and they packaged it in what you would call an environmental package. That's all they did. If you really read the Green New Deal, it is... I'm just going to say, I do not care what anybody has to say. It is communism. It is Marxism at its core.
Well, if you look here, this is straight off of Wikipedia. So the Green New Deal proposals call for public policy to address climate change, along with achieving other social aims like job creation and reducing economic inequality. So what the media does is they tell you Green New Deal, good for the environment, and everyone who just listens to it at face value is like, that's great, let's do it.
Right.
But if you do a little more research, it's talking about redistribution. It's talking about paying reparations for people who were a product of slavery and things like that. It's talking about giving jobs to specific groups or races of people based on just their race or group, as opposed to their qualifications. And it's like, wait, I thought this was about the environment.
Right.
So that's why it's important that we do our own research, that we don't just take these things like, oh, well, the authorities said it, so it must be great.
Right.
We need to do our own research.
Yes, as a free society, and even as we read the Constitution, we have to always go back and remember that it says it is our right, it is our duty to throw off such corrupt governments. And the only thing that governments do, the power corrupts, and absolute power absolutely corrupts. So the more power you give anybody, and I'm not by any means somebody who's above it.
We'd probably be susceptible to the same thing. If you give me a bunch of power, I probably wouldn't know how to handle it.
Right. So we're firm believers in checks and balances, and that's also part of the reason we want to do this show. We don't want to have one person. We're doing it together because we don't want to have just one person making rules and decisions all together.
And then with the Green New Deal, not to mention the amount of money, it's like $93 trillion that we don't even have that.
And just to give you an example, that's more money than the entire world has. Just so you know, the entire
Oh, is it? I
world's
didn't know
wealth,
that.
I think, is 63 trillion, 70 trillion. We'll look that up
Entire
and give you
world.
exact numbers, but it's
Wow.
more money.
Oh no, it's 360 trillion. Okay, but still, the point is it's a lot.
The
One
entire
third of it.
world's wealth?
Yeah, I mean this is the first thing that came up. So I don't know. I'd have to look. There's
I,
one that says 105 trillion. So I'd have to do.
I
more
have to
research
look
on
up
it.
the numbers exactly, but
But
regardless of even, let's just give it the benefit of the doubt and say it is 360 trillion. That's over 25% of the entire world's wealth. And if you want to spend it on that, literally confiscating it, taking it out of the free market to do these things.
Yeah, I wonder how much it would cost if it was just the environment, right? But aside from it being all these other like
Right.
communist agendas or
Right.
communist things written in there, just look at the green part of it, which is moving over to renewable energy, and I think it's mostly referring to solar and wind.
Yes.
I want to talk about solar and wind energy.
Yeah.
They sound like a great idea.
Yeah, they do.
Right? And
Free power.
exactly. All
For
you gotta do-
everyone.
it's just the sun is hitting you
The
and you're
sun's
making free
always
power.
there. The wind is
And
there.
the wind is blowing. So
Yeah.
it sounds like a great idea. And when I hear it, I'm like, that is a great idea, right? Like, why are we going to keep burning fossil fuels and emitting carbon dioxide into the atmosphere when we could just use the sunlight and stuff? And that's the thing that people take at face value, and they don't do more research, like we said, right? So I at first thought it was a great idea. I still think it's a good idea to some extent, but you start doing more research, and the amount of resources it takes to create solar panels and to create windmills and stuff is a lot.
Well, it's also damaging to the environment.
That's the next thing. First of all, it's not efficient. So a solar panel, the best solar panels now only harness like 26% efficiency.
Right.
And windmills are like 40 something or 30 something like that.
Give you a quick idea. The leader in this world to do clean energy, I think and I know in 2015 it was Germany. They may still be. The best they ever got was 10% of their population was, their energy was coming from clean energies, quote unquote. We'll get into that a little bit later, hopefully.
Yeah, so from
about
renewable
that there's
energy.
no such thing as clean energy. Everything produces waste. So 10% of their energy was being produced by these renewable energies, wind or solar. And then you're also seeing massive fluctuations in
power, right?
In their power bill, like your electric bill, because on days where it wasn't as sunny or times in the season where it wasn't as windy, everything still relied on supply and demand. And if it wasn't windy, or wasn't producing energy, and that energy now creates a lesser supply, demand goes up, your actual bill goes up. They were having 100% increases, double your bill, if not more.
And not to mention that, but then you need to make up for that. And how are you going to make up for that? By burning fossil fuels.
Exactly.
So, and that's just that aspect of it. Then there's the waste aspect of it. These things last a lot less.
Yes.
Like their lifetime is not as much as some machine that is used to mine fossil fuels.
Right. So what happens to old windmills that are made of fiberglass, which are not good for the environment?
All of that stuff, plastics and everything they use, most of it is just it's non-renewable, so you have to get rid of it. It's waste.
Right.
So when you start doing research on that sort of thing, you come to realize that it might not be a bad idea in some cases, but you definitely can't depend on it 100%.
Right.
There's a reason why the United States only uses 3% renewable energy, right?
And the other thing is, if we were going to mine, because we would have to mine a lot of raw materials out of the ground to make all these things, you're talking about a mining project that this world has never seen. One, mining is not great for the earth.
It's horrible.
Okay. Two, who's going to be doing the mining? They're not going to be doing it in industrialized countries, because we're not going. The standard to mine that much and to get it that quickly are way too much in the West. The standards and regulations for that are way too much, and they should be safe. But they're going to get away from that, and they're going to get around that, and they're going to go to third world countries where people are probably going to die. They're not going to be in good working conditions, and that's what it's going to take to produce this pie in the sky idea that's going to cost too much money and hurt the planet by mining that much. And then also you're still producing a waste where you have to put these solar panels and these wind turbines that are not made out of biodegradable products. You're going to put those in landfills. So you're still producing issues.
And not only that, right? But when you generate this electricity, some of it needs to be stored in batteries.
Yes.
So you need those rare earth minerals like lithium and
That's
and
all
stuff, which you gotta mine.
That's all other parts of the mining process.
Yeah. So it's just not the best way to go. And that's something that these proponents of the Green New Deal and all these environmental policies, they're going to push for, because they don't. Yes, they want the environment to be better, but they're pushing all these other agendas on the bottom that's going to give them more power.
Right.
They want you to be like, yes, this is a good idea. Let's
Right.
use solar and wind, and they want you to blindly follow that, so that then you can vote that in, and then they can get that power that you
Right.
didn't know was there, that they snuck into that bill.
Right. Because I do believe that these people know this. I don't think that every
course they know
person that's
this.
putting this in understands all these arguments that we're bringing up, that this is actually not going to be that much better for the environment. This is all to change the economies of the West
Exactly.
away from free markets. And why does it have to be this global thing? Why do they want it to be a global thing? Because the only way to make socialism and Marxism really work is to make it global. Because if you, let's say that gets established in one country, then you are a rich billionaire, you just move to another country. If you can create a global tax, which is exactly what the Paris Climate Accord is, they want to implement, a carbon tax,
Yeah.
a global carbon tax. So there's nowhere you can run and take your money anywhere else. And that, I have found overwhelming evidence that is the deepest parts of this.
Yeah, so essentially, I mean, they know what they're doing. I mean, it's their job. They read over the bills, and if they're not reading these bills, and they're just not doing their job, so why are they even there? So they know what they're doing, and so they're knowingly pushing these agendas so that essentially they can get more power. And that's another thing, right? You talked about the Paris Climate Accord.
Right.
Ex-President Donald Trump pulls out of the Paris Climate Accord, and everyone's like, oh my God, so this is how it looks like from at face value.
Right.
He doesn't care about the environment because the world is coming together with the Paris Climate Accord, sounds very pretty,
Right.
to help stop global warming, right? And he just pulled out of it. He must not care. That's what it looks like, and that's what all these media outlets are going to push for. But that's not what it was about at all. He pulled out of that so that we wouldn't be these slaves to carbon taxes and things like that. And in the time he pulled out of that, the United States actually saw a reduction in carbon emissions, as opposed to the other countries that were part of the Paris Climate Accord, which saw a huge increase in carbon emissions, because the Paris Climate Accord isn't about the environment.
Right.
It's about this world power.
Right. It's about rewriting the economics of the West, the economies of the West.
And the United States actually, compared to China and to other countries, our waste emissions are a lot less. So when you look
even to the UK and Germany, ours is less.
When you look at
per capita.
Yeah. No, and when it comes to China, I mean, they have a much larger population, so it's just numbers in general. And I mean, you can just look this up. You can see them dumping things into the ocean and things like that. So when you look at sure, there's always something we can do more. Like, we can always do something more as a country. We might not be able to do anything about China because they're their own nation, but we can do something about our own nation. That's true. But this whole idea that the United States is destroying the world, it's like, that's just not true. We can do more, but a lot of it comes, or most of it comes, from China and other countries in the East. So that's something I would say there when it comes to the Paris Climate Accord and other countries.
Well, part of the Paris Climate Accord, one, we have to realize that if all the standards were to be met, all the standards that they're saying for everybody to meet, which, one, let's just talk about China and India real quick. They have not even come close. They have increased their carbon emissions by huge margins.
Yeah, and it's due to their growing population.
Right. Let's say we do all these things. Let's say we meet and nail every one of these standards within the next 100 years. We just do it every year. We meet every one of these standards. Their goal is literally cooling the temperature of the planet 0.5 degree. And I will tell you, for me, it is not worth it for 2 seconds to wreck the the economies of the West, which have provided so much have produced a lack of human suffering on a wide scale. It is not worth wrecking that on the idea that we may lower the temperature half a degree.
That's good.
Right, so we have to remember that, and you also have to talk about the other thing that backs it up is China and India are not held to the standards that the U.S. and the Western world are.
And I think they're
held
part
to.
of the Paris Climate
No, they
Accord,
are. They're signed on to it. Every country in the world is signed on to it.
So,
North
yeah.
Korea, for God's sake, is signed on to this. They do not care. They are signing on to it to appease because this is all a ploy to change the economies of the West. China is not held to these standards. China says that they're going to do these things and continues to create more and more waste because it's not about China. It's about the Western world.
Yeah, because they always hold the United States to these standards, but not the other countries. And I think that's just, again, that just goes to a power grab. When you see that President Trump pulled out of the Paris Climate Accord, anybody who sees that at face value and
Right.
CNN and all of that, this is horrible. And then Biden jumps back in. He did jump back in, didn't he? Or he was talking about
I know
it.
that they're talking. I know that it's not the easiest thing just because the president said he pulled this out. It didn't happen at that moment. The President Trump I'm talking about didn't happen at that moment that he pulled this out. It took us some time. I don't know exactly how it all works specifically, but I do believe it takes us a little bit of time. But
Okay.
yes, his goal is to get us back in.
But my thing is, it's not like these people don't know that. Either they're being advised incorrectly, or again, it's about power. If he says, "Hey, I'm a team player,
Right.
and I'm going to put us back in this idea of saving the planet," but he knows it's not true, but it appeases everyone and
Right.
it gets his voters to vote for him. And that's just the case with politics. I've noticed that
Right.
politics at the end of the day is appeasing your voter base
Yes.
so that you can get re-voted or you can get voted in the first place. It's who are you targeting? Appease them, say what they want to hear, then say what everyone wants to hear, get majority vote, you get into office, and then you do what you want. Right? And the reason that these politicians aren't able to completely take over is because there are re-elections.
Right.
So they have to keep their voters happy. So they do things which aren't necessarily the best by lying to the public
Right.
and making them think like, hey, I'll do this, which will make you happy, but in the back, it's giving me more power. So that's why I just encourage everyone to do your own research and look things up. Don't just think authority said it, so it must be true, or authority said it, so like it must be the right thing, you know?
Right.
At the end of the day, politicians are looking for power and
Right,
to get
right.
reelected so that they can get paid.
Right. And I think that's what all. I think that we're all. Our human nature is that. Our human nature is fallen. Our human nature is inclined for me to get ahead, even if it means stepping on the back of somebody else. That's our human nature. And, that's also why we want to implement our faith in here as well, because without
We
that,
need
that's
values.
how we make this country, how the West, what made the West great, which we go back to many times, is that we go back to our Judeo-Christian values mixed with freedom. And that's why. But the point is, the further we get away from that, our human nature takes over. That being said, though, we got to talk about clean energy. So,
That's exactly where I was going next.
yeah.
Right?
So I just want to talk real quick. There's a large debate, though, when we just talked about all the waste that solar panels cause, that the wind turbines, when you have to,
Yeah.
when
So
you
what
have
can
to,
we do?
yeah. So basically, when a wind turbine is reached its life cycle, it's made of fiberglass. That has to go into
And plastics and stuff.
That has to go into what do you call it? A landfill.
Yeah.
Same thing with the solar panels. Same thing with the old batteries. And also the mining that it takes to do these things. This is all bad for the environment.
And you're going into natural areas that aren't otherwise disturbed, right? Like clean forests and stuff. Got to get in there and mine. So what's the best solution? What do we do?
I would love somebody to do a study. I haven't seen a study on this yet, but I want to see what would be more environmentally costly, just to continue to use fossil fuels, or if we did this huge shift.
Nuclear.
Well, that's the real answer, is nuclear.
And everyone is terrified of nuclear because of what happened at Chernobyl, and it just sounds scary.
Yes.
Nuclear bombs, nuclear energy. Oh, what if there's an accident? It sounds scary.
Right.
It does. But if you do your research, it is
Right.
the safest form of energy.
Yes.
And it's the most efficient form of energy, aside from things like black holes, which we can't do yet. But yeah, I did some study with physics, and there's an energy cap to every form of energy conversion. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm sure you guys have heard E equals MC squared, right? So everything, including you and I, has an insane amount of energy stored within us, but it cannot be harnessed just due to physical limitations.
Right.
So there's a study done on or like physicists have discovered what is the most energy efficient, and I think it's things that are orbiting close to the center of a black hole, and obviously we can't do that. So after that, it's nuclear.
Right.
Nuclear propulsion. Sorry, not nuclear propulsion. Nuclear reactions.
Right.
The fact that you can break down nuclear energy is going to give you the most energy for the amount of mass spent or something like that, right? So I think what happened with Chernobyl obviously was devastating, but I think
that also wasn't. They didn't have the standards that they had. Well, one, this is back in the 80s, so we're going back over 40 years at this point. Right about 40 years. I forget when it happened exactly, but it's close to 40 years. It's 30-something years that Chernobyl happened. The standards were not the standards that they have today. Two, this was also the USSR, where there was a government control over everything. The free market was not making standards. The free market wasn't being utilized there, and so there was less standards in the USSR at that time than there was even the United States. So we're talking about the United States having higher standards back then, 30 years ago, and today all the way that we've come. Nuclear is very safe. Yes, there's a downside because we can talk about nuclear waste, and yes, it does need to be stored. Yes, we can create environments and storage facilities where they can store it. My point being is that there will always be a waste. Which one is going to be the most cost effective? Dollars and cents. Nuclear energy will not be, yes, anything can happen. We need to put specific landfills that are just for nuclear waste. And yes, we those are some, obstacles that we do have to overcome.
I think as space exploration becomes cheaper too, there might be the possibility of sending the waste into space. I don't think right now it's possible because it's way too costly.
Right.
But if we come up with an easier way to get to space, that's another possibility. I think right now they bury it or something like that.
Right. I know that there's some Scandinavian countries that they actually dig mines. They actually create a facility down there, facility just to make sure if anything happens, if they were ever bombed, if there was an earthquake, if anything, they know where this is. They have it logged, for historical purposes.
Yeah.
They don't just bury these mines or anything like that. But the point is, it creates such cheap energy for all. And this could help the third world, get ahead.
Yeah, here in South Florida, I believe that most of our energy, if not it's a large chunk, that comes from a nuclear power facility south of, east of Homestead. It's closer to the Keys, and it's really isolated. So power plants, what they do now is, I think that the standard is they have to be at minimum 40 miles away from major civilization.
Yeah, I forget the particular standards at this time.
And it's completely, it has a whole irrigation system for cooling and all that stuff.
Right.
And basically the way it works is you have a controlled nuclear reaction, unlike an atomic bomb, which is exponential. This one is linear. And it's a controlled nuclear reaction, one after the other, after the other, after the other. And it generates heat, which will power turbines, which can create electricity. So it's similar to fossil fuels. Fossil fuels burn to create heat, to create electricity, and nuclear power plants do it with a nuclear reaction. The good thing is that nuclear power plants don't release all that deadly, or sorry, not deadly gas, but the harmful gases, right?
Right. CO2 emissions.
Yeah. So I think what country is it? Sweden that's doing 40%.
Yeah.
Oh wait, did you say that already?
Well, I forget which particular country it was, but I knew it was one of the Scandinavians. But they're really moving toward.
Yeah, I think that's the future. I mean, there have been accidents, Chernobyl being the most famous. There have been accidents, so obviously, it carries some danger to it, just like any other task. But I think it's the safest. I think studies have been done, and it's the safest.
Yes, it's cheaper in the long run. Yes, we would have to reconvert a lot of our power grids to be powered by
nuclear. If we're talking about saving the environment, then this should be an investment we're willing to make, right? As opposed to $92 trillion in the Green New Deal.
I would 100% agree.
Why not put a couple billion into some new power plants, right?
I 100% agree. I do believe it's safe. I do believe the standards are safe. I believe that's the best thing, and it will be cheaper, like I said before. If we really care about the environment, if we really care about poor countries getting ahead, and essentially not having to industrialize using fossil fuels, they can industrialize cheaper with nuclear power plants, in the long run, I don't understand that like burning animal dung is what they're doing now, which is obviously the cheapest thing, but that's really bad for the environment.
Yeah, that's horrible.
But that's one of the best things, I believe, for this nation and for the world at large. I hope that the United States leads the charge in it.
And no, one of the biggest problems with nuclear energy right now is people are scared of it.
Right.
When cities and municipalities are going to create a nuclear power plant, a lot of them, I don't know if all of them, they survey people and everyone's against it. No,
Right.
I don't want a nuclear power plant near my house. No, I'm going to die of radiation poisoning. And I think the truth is you get more radiation poisoning from your microwave
Right.
than you would from a power plant that's like 40 miles away. So I think that the younger generation, millennials and Generation Z,
Right.
are more on board with nuclear power as opposed to people of the older generation, which might have lived through something like Chernobyl.
Right.
So I think as time passes, we're moving in that direction, and I think we should.
Right.
And hopefully to the older generation, if you're listening, do some research on
Right,
nuclear
right,
power,
right.
so you can see how good it is and how safe it is compared to fossil fuels.
Right. Absolutely.
If we can talk about fracking for a second.
Fracking, oil fracking. Let's talk the evil fracking.
Let's see what it is. I think it has to do with horizontal drilling as opposed to straight vertical drilling.
Yes.
And it's actually better for the environment than traditional drilling.
Yes, and fracking also, there are standards to newer fracking facilities as opposed to older fracking facilities. And there's also differences in the level of which those facilities and the means in which that oil is extracted is maintained.
Horizontal fracking.
Yes.
So it sounds like a scary word. You hear oil, fracking. These are all dirty things. I mean, if you think about it, oil looks dirty. You don't want to get oil on your hands.
A lot of the language, how it's said.
Exactly. And again, it just goes back to these people feeding you these words.
Right.
And feeding you these ideas. Like when you hear fracking, you think something negative. Because that's the way you're conditioned to think.
Right.
But do some research. And look it up and is it a better alternative? I mean, I think nuclear is a better alternative.
Right, I think that's the best alternative.
Hey, if fracking is better than burning fossil fuels and it's something that we can do right now,
yes,
let's do it.
I'm 100% for it. Yes, standards need to be applied. Yes, we need to make sure that I'm okay with government regulation for the standards in which fracking is done.
Yeah, sure.
The newer stuff, when stuff is maintained, that is the means in which you frack, when that is maintained and held up to high standards, it's very, very minimal against the environment.
Yeah, I remember that was a big talking point during the presidential debate. Biden's like, I'm going to end fracking,
Yes.
Sorry, he didn't say I'm going to end fracking, but Trump was accusing him of saying like he's going to end fracking, and then Biden was saying, no, I never said that, and then later it came out that he did say that.
Right.
And basically the left was attacking Trump for being pro fracking, and the right was attacking Biden for saying like, oh, you're anti-fracking,
right,
or whatever. So the idea is like, hey, you don't just hear this word and automatically take a side.
Right.
Do some research. I think if they weren't so busy trying to get elected,
right,
they would be able to do the research and present it clearly instead of it being something of debate. It would be something like, hey, let's stop fighting for a second and let's care about the environment.
Right.
So.
And the one thing is that, the final argument with the fracking is like, okay, yes, even if it's done with the greatest standards and you're not affecting the environment through the extraction, one of the arguments is, well, you are setting up these facilities in a natural environment, as it was, we're disrupting an environment.
Well, then let's go nuclear. Let's go nuclear.
Well, even that, going to the degree of, you're setting up a nuclear power plant that was once a natural area.
Well, what... I mean,
and
yeah.
The point I'm trying to make is that at the end of the day, the human being, I will unapologetically say, is intrinsically more valuable than anything else on this earth. And if we take some of the land to make our lives better, I'm okay with that.
Yeah, as long as it's regulated. But I mean, you could also replace the ones that are currently there if possible. I don't know.
Right.
I don't know the logistics behind building a power plant. I don't know if it needs to be in this particular area. But if it's regulated and the least amount of damage you can cause, it's all about a trade-off, right? How
Right,
much land are we
absolutely.
going to take compared to how much land we're going to save?
Right.
How much of the planet we're going to save
Absolutely.
by just taking some
Absolutely.
acres here and there to
Right.
get some clean power.
And that's just to have that final idea. You know, the most extreme fringe on the environmentalists say that human beings are just a cancer on the planet and they just destroy it. And it's like, well,
There's a train of thought like that says we should just stop reproducing and let ourselves die out.
yes, but the whole point is, from a biblical perspective, which we'll come back to real quick, is that we were called from back in the beginning of the garden to rule and subdue the earth. And I believe that is through politics. I believe that's through the environment. I do believe that's through reducing human suffering. I believe that is what we're called to do as humanity.
Yeah. And if you any other faith system you may have, or if you're an atheist, even genetics point out to it, right? If we don't have the drive to reproduce, then we would have already been extinct.
Right.
So yeah, so that's just not a good argument. But,
Absolutely.
Okay, so I'd like to end early today, just try to
Yeah.
bring these down little by little as we can.
Absolutely. No, it was a good show.
And I think we pretty much covered all the bases.
Yeah.
End of the day, I think we cleared up some stereotypes about
Yeah.
the environment. And so I hope you guys liked the show.
Yeah, this is
Any
a good
closing
show.
words?
Please let us know. Please feel free to reach out to us at any time. Inbox me or Fur.
Challenge us. Maybe we got some of these things wrong.
Yeah. Challenge us. Reach out to us. Maybe we'll have you on the show. Also, let us know if there are some topics that you want to hear us talk about. But we are signing off. This is the Doug and Fur Show.
Peace.